Have you ever felt like you were walking through a storm with no umbrella? Like the arrows of life, the sudden bad news, the toxic people, the anxiety about tomorrow were all aimed directly at your heart. Most people spend their lives running from one shelter to another, hoping they won't get hit. But what if I told you there is a place so secure, so hidden, and so powerful that no weapon formed against you could even touch your spirit? Today we aren't just reading a Bible verse. We are stepping into a fortress. We are uncovering the 10 divine keys hidden within Psalm 91, the most powerful prayer of protection ever written. This is not just a morning routine. It is a spiritual survival contract. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you how to activate a personalized covenant that commands angels to guard your footsteps and gives you the power to trample over the very things that used to terrify you. If you have been feeling weary, if you have been feeling exposed, or if you simply need to feel the tangible presence of God around you right now, stay with me. By the time we reach the end of this prayer, you won't just feel protected, you will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are unshakable. Let us enter the secret place together. The concept of the shadow of the Almighty, as presented in the opening of Psalm 91, hinges entirely on the physical and spiritual reality of proximity. To understand this one key note in its fullest depth, one must first visualize the mechanics of a shadow in the natural world. A shadow is not an independent entity that can travel across distances to find you. It is a direct consequence of an object obstructing light. Therefore, to be in the shadow of the Almighty, the believer must be standing in such extreme closeness to God that there is no measurable gap between the Creator and the created. This proximity is the secret place, a sanctuary that is not found through travel, but through a radical alignment with the heart. The imagery suggests a relationship that has moved beyond formal religion or distant petitioning into a state of absolute intimacy. When the text speaks of abiding under this shadow, it implies a permanent dwelling rather than a temporary visit. In the ancient Near Eastern context, the shadow offered more than just a metaphor. It provided a literal, life-saving respite from the blistering, lethal heat of the desert sun. To be in the shadow was to be rescued from exhaustion and dehydration. Spiritually, this translates to a place of total preservation where the heat of life, as trials, persecution, stress, or grief cannot reach the core of the individual, as spirit. Furthermore, being in someone else's shadow means that whatever strikes at you must first pass through the one casting the shadow. It establishes God as the primary barrier between the believer and the world as volatility. This proximity also implies a rhythmic synchronicity. As God moves, the one in his shadow moves. There is no lag or delay in protection because the shadow is tethered to the source. It is a position of profound humility, acknowledging that the shade we enjoy is not of our own making, yet it is also a position of supreme confidence. The Almighty, El Shaddai, denotes a God who is all-sufficient and nourishing, suggesting that this shadow is not dark or cold, but is instead a place of nurturing growth and quiet strength, where the soul is recharged simply by being near the source of all life. The second keynote concerning the snare of the Fowler delves into the psychological and spiritual reality of the hidden dangers that life presents. In the biblical context, a fowler is a hunter of birds who does not use brute force or open confrontation to capture his prey. Instead, he uses craftiness, camouflage, and the element of surprise. He sets traps that are intentionally designed to be invisible until the very moment they are sprung. This metaphor is a profound representation of the subtle, radioactive threats we encounter in our modern lives, those traps of betrayal, addiction, sudden financial ruin, or even the slow creep of pride and bitterness that catch us off guard when we feel most secure. Unlike an open enemy who declares war, the snare represents the danger that looks like safety. It is the bait that lures us toward a compromise, or the hidden pitfall in a path we have walked 1,000 times before. The power of this imagery lies in the vulnerability of the bird. It is small, fragile, and often unaware of the complex mechanisms designed for its downfall. This mirrors our own human limitations. We cannot see around the corners of tomorrow, nor can we always discern the true intentions of those around us. However, the promise of Psalm 91 is not that the snares will not be set, but that we will be delivered from them. This deliverance suggests a divine awareness that supersedes our own. It implies that God, our protector, sees the hunter in the brush and knows the mechanics of the trap long before we approach it. Divine intervention in this context is often a narrow escape, the snapping of the trap, just as the bird takes flight. This creates a testimony of grace where we realize that our survival was not a product of our own cleverness or heightened intuition, but a result of a watchful eye that operates on our behalf. To be delivered from the snare of the fowler is to acknowledge that there are forces of darkness that are smarter than us, but there is a God who is wiser than the darkness. It speaks to a level of protection that covers our blind spots, guarding us from the things we don't even know we should be afraid of, and ensuring that our freedom is maintained even when we are surrounded by invisible constraints. The third keynote, centered on the imagery of divine pinions and the shelter of wings, presents a dualistic view of God as nature that is both tenderly maternal and formidably protective. In the Hebrew tradition, the word used for pinions refers to the strongest feathers of a bird's wing, the primary flight feathers that provide the power for movement and the structural integrity to withstand high winds. When the psalmist declares that God will cover you with his feathers, it suggests an act of extreme intimacy and lowering of stature. It depicts a God who stoops down to envelop the believer, creating a micro-environment of safety that is shielded from the external atmosphere. This imagery evokes the behavior of a mother bird who, during a storm or in the presence of a predator, tucks her defenseless chicks beneath her wings. In that hidden space, the chick feels the warmth of the parent's body and the steady beat of a heart that is larger than its own. This is the emotional core of the prayer, the transformation of a cold, threatening world into a warm, enclosed sanctuary. However, the metaphor does not stop at soft feathers, it transitions immediately into the shield and buckler. This is a crucial pivot from the softness of a nest to the hardness of a battlefield. It reminds us that divine protection is not passive or fragile. A buckler was a small, round shield gripped in the hand or worn on the arm to parry the direct thrusts of a sword. This suggests that God as truth is a proactive defensive tool that moves with the believer to deflect specific targeted attacks. The combination of feathers and shields means that God provides both internal peace and external defense. While the feathers soothe the spirit and calm the nervous system from the trauma of life's storms, the shield stands ready to meet the arrows of conflict. This dual protection addresses the totality of the human experience, our need for emotional comfort when we are broken, and our need for spiritual armor when we are challenged. Under these wings, there is no room for the enemy to penetrate, because the space is already fully occupied by the presence of the Almighty. It is a place where the believer can rest without vigilance, knowing that the wing above them is backed by the strength of the Creator who neither slumbers nor sleeps, turning a place of vulnerability into a position of absolute, unassailable security. The fourth keynote addresses the noonday destruction and the arrows that fly by day, a concept that challenges the common misconception that spiritual warfare or life's greatest trials only occur in the dark night of the soul. In the biblical landscape, the noonday sun was at its most fierce and unrelenting. It was the time when shadows disappeared, and the heat became a visible, shimmering force of exhaustion. This metaphor speaks to the calamities that strike when we are most visible, most active, and seemingly most prepared. It represents the daytime crisis, the sudden health diagnosis in the prime of life, the professional collapse at the height of a career, or the public scandal that erupts when everything seems to be going well. Often, we are naturally vigilant during the night of our lives, when we are grieving or struggling, but we tend to lower our guard when life is bright and busy. The noonday destruction is particularly dangerous because it hits when we are distracted by the movement and noise of the world. It is the arrow that is shot from a distance, hitting a target that didn't even know it was being watched. The psalm reminds us that faith is not a seasonal tool or a flashlight to be used only when the power goes out. It is a constant atmosphere By highlighting the protection available at high noon, the text emphasizes that God, as presence, is not just for our moments of weakness, but also for our moments of supposed strength. It suggests that the arrows of envy, competition, and sudden misfortune are constantly in the air, but they lose their lethality when we are anchored in the secret place. This protection provides a spiritual climate control, allowing the believer to remain productive and focused even when the heat of social or economic pressure is at its peak. It acknowledges that the world does not stop being a battlefield just because the sun is out. Instead, it promises a supernatural immunity that functions in the marketplace, the office, and the public square just as effectively as it does in the prayer closet. This level of faith requires a conscious decision to remain under the shadow, even when the sun is directly overhead and we feel capable of standing on our own. It is a call to a 24-hour reliance on the divine, recognizing that our greatest successes often require more protection than our deepest failures, as the heights of the noonday are where we are most exposed to the elements. The fifth keynote focuses on the personalized covenant, specifically the dramatic and intentional shift in the grammatical voice of Psalm 91. Throughout the first 13 verses, the text is a testimony about God, spoken in the third person. The psalmist describes his wings, his faithfulness, and his protection as a witness, sharing an observation. However, in the final 3 verses, the structure of the poem undergoes a radical transformation. God himself breaks the silence. This shift from he to I marks the moment where abstract theology becomes a concrete, personal contract. It is the transition from knowing about God to knowing God. This I signifies a God who is not a distant, historical figure or a philosophical concept, but a living participant who responds directly to the individual's devotion. When God says, I will deliver him, I will set him on high, and I will answer him, he is signing his name to a spiritual guarantee. This personalized covenant is activated by a specific condition, because he has set his love upon me. The Hebrew word used here for love implies a binding or a clinging, much like the way a person might hold onto a life raft in a turbulent sea. It is not an emotional sentiment, but a resolute attachment. This indicates that the protection of the secret place is not a generic, universal blanket thrown over everyone, but a specific response to the heart that has chosen to make the Lord its dwelling place. This distinction is vital because it restores agency to the believer. We are not passive victims of fate, but active participants in a covenant relationship. By making the Lord our refuge, as mentioned in verse 9, we move the relationship from the public square into the private chambers of the Almighty. This shift also highlights the accessibility of the divine. The fact that the creator of the universe would pivot the entire narrative of the psalm to address the specific needs of one person promising to be with them in trouble and to satisfy them with long life demonstrates an intimacy that is almost scandalous in its depth. It suggests that while God governs the galaxies, he is simultaneously listening for the whisper of the one who loves him. This covenant ensures that the believer is never just a number or a face in a crowd. They are a partner in a divine agreement where their safety is a matter of God's own personal honor and word. The sixth keynote explores the power of proclamation, specifically the spiritual mechanic where faith is transitioned from a silent internal belief to a tangible external force through the spoken word. In Psalm 91, the protection does not begin with a passive thought. It begins with the phrase, I will say of the Lord. This vocalization is not merely a description of reality. It is an act of creation and a staking of a claim. In the spiritual realm, words function as the legal tender of the heart. By speaking out loud that the Lord is a refuge and a fortress, the believer is effectively making the Most High their dwelling place, as reinforced in verse 9. This suggests that the environment of protection around a person is influenced by the atmosphere of their speech. Proclamation acts as a bridge between the unseen promises of God and the visible trials of the world. When a person vocalizes their trust, they are not informing God of his attributes, but rather they are aligning their own frequency with his power and setting a boundary for the enemy to hear. In the biblical tradition, the word carries substance. It is an arrow shot into the spiritual atmosphere. To say, "He is my fortress," in the midst of a collapsing situation is an act of defiance against fear. It forces the mind to subordinate its anxieties to the authority of the confession. This key note emphasizes that faith remains dormant until it is activated by the voice. It is the difference between having a weapon in an armory and wielding it on the battlefield. Furthermore, the act of proclamation reinforces the individual's identity as a covenant partner. By speaking the word, the believer mirrors the creative nature of God, who spoke light into existence. This vocal consistency creates a canopy of sorts. The more the mouth agrees with the divine promise, the more the soul finds rest in that reality. It is a discipline of the tongue that refuses to narrate the snare and instead insists on narrating the deliverance. This practice transforms the believer from a victim of circumstances into a herald of victory, ensuring that the peace of the secret place is not just felt in the heart, but is established as the governing law over their physical life. Thus, the power of the tongue is revealed not just as a tool for communication, but as the ignition switch for divine protection. The seventh keynote concerns the profound reality of angelic stewardship, a promise that elevates the protection of the believer from a general divine oversight to a specific tactical deployment of heavenly forces. The text declares that he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways, which suggests a high-level administrative command issued by the Creator. This is not a vague sentiment of being watched over. The word charge implies a legal mandate or a military assignment. It means that specific spiritual beings are formally tasked with the responsibility of your safety. These angels are depicted as active guardians who are intensely focused on the minutiae of a human life, moving from the ethereal realms into the dusty, physical paths where we walk. The imagery of being borne up in their hands conveys a level of vigilance that prevents even the smallest fracture in the believer's journey lest you dash your foot against a stone. This highlights the preventative nature of divine grace. Often, we focus on the major miracles that rescue us from giant catastrophes, but this keynote reminds us of the thousands of small stones, minor accidents, overlooked errors, or subtle diversions that could have derailed our progress if not for an unseen hand steadying our stride. This stewardship implies that we are never truly walking alone, regardless of how isolated we may feel. There is a celestial logistics at work on our behalf, clearing the path and providing a spiritual scaffolding around our physical vulnerability. This angelic presence acts as a bridge between the secret place of the Most High and the rough terrain of the world. It suggests that God, as protection is granular, it is as concerned with the health of your feet as it is with the salvation of your soul. Furthermore, this stewardship is not restricted to holy places. It follows the believer in all your ways, whether in the marketplace, during travel, or within the home. It is a constant, surrounding escort that operates with the authority of the King as decree. By understanding this, the believer moves from a state of hypervigilance and anxiety into a state of rested alertness. We are encouraged to walk boldly, not because we are indestructible in our own flesh, but because we are the subjects of a divine security detail that has been ordered by the highest authority in existence to ensure we reach our destination intact. The eighth keynote explores the absolute authority granted to the believer over the lion and the cobra, a powerful metaphor for the diverse and predatory nature of spiritual and physical opposition. In the ancient world, the lion represented the overt, roaring threat, something that attacks with brute force, loud intimidation, and visible aggression. This symbolizes the loud crisis in our lives, the public confrontation, the overwhelming financial collapse, or the blatant persecution that seeks to devour our peace through sheer intensity. Conversely, the cobra represents the subtle, hidden, and venomous threat. It is the danger that hides in the grass, the quiet betrayal, the slow-acting poison of a toxic relationship, or the internal whispers of depression that strike without warning. The promise of Psalm 91 is not merely that we will survive these encounters, but that we will tread upon them. Treading is an act of total subjugation. It implies that the very things meant to destroy us are placed beneath our feet. This imagery signifies a radical shift in power dynamics. Instead of being the prey, the believer becomes the one who walks in dominion. To trample the young lion and the serpent means that neither the power of the visible enemy nor the cunning of the invisible one has the final word over your life. This victory is not achieved through human courage alone, but through the inherited authority of the Most High. It suggests a spiritual anti-venom and a supernatural strength that allows a person to walk through dangerous territory with their head held high. This keynote emphasizes that the path to our destiny often goes through the territory of the predator, not around it. God does not always remove the lion or the cobra from the path. Instead, He empowers the believer to walk over them. This level of authority requires a heart that is fully surrendered to God, as the power to trample is a derived power. It is a reminder that we do not have to live in a state of constant evasion or fight or flight mechanics. Because we are hidden in the shadow of the Almighty, the things that used to terrify us become the ground we walk on. This transforms the believer as perspective from one of victimhood to one of victory, establishing that there is no level of threat, no matter how loud or how venomous, that can withstand the weight of a person walking in divine assignment. The ninth keynote focuses on the condition of love, specifically the phrase, "because He has set His love upon me," which serves as the spiritual pivot for the final divine promises in Psalm 91. This is perhaps the most profound of all the notes because it moves the relationship from a legalistic or transactional framework into one of pure mutual affection. In the original language, the term for "set His love," hashak, carries the connotation of being joined to, clinging to, or fastening oneself to another. It is the image of someone holding on for dear life, not out of duty, but out of a deep-seated desire and recognition of their source. This suggests that the extraordinary protections and elevations described in the psalm are not randomly assigned, nor are they earned through a checklist of religious rituals. They are the byproduct of a heart that has intentionally entangled itself with the divine. By setting one's love upon God, the believer makes a conscious choice to prioritize the presence of the Almighty over all other attachments. This clinging is what qualifies the soul for the subsequent promise, "Therefore I will deliver him." It implies that deliverance is a natural consequence of proximity. When you are fastened to the one who cannot be moved, you become unmovable. This condition also clarifies that God is looking for more than just a cry for help in a crisis. He is looking for a settled affection that exists before the trouble begins. It is a heart-to-heart connection that establishes a spiritual frequency. Furthermore, this love is linked to the act of knowing His name. In a biblical sense, to know someone as name is to understand their character, their authority, and their history of faithfulness. It is an experiential knowledge rather than an intellectual one. When we set our love upon Him, we are saying that we have tasted and seen that He is good, and we refuse to be detached from that goodness. This bond creates a specialized environment where God's honor is at stake in our protection. Because the believer has chosen to identify so closely with God, God identifies closely with the believer. This mutual belonging is the ultimate security. It means that our safety is no longer just our concern, it is the concern of the one to whom we are joined. It transforms the secret place from a mere hiding spot into a home where the believer dwells in the confidence of being cherished, ensuring that the strength of the deliverance is always matched by the depth of the devotion. The 10th keynote concludes the spiritual journey of Psalm 91 with the dual promise of longevity and a vision of salvation, moving the focus from immediate protection to the ultimate fulfillment of a human life. The phrase, "with long life, I will satisfy him," suggests far more than a mere accumulation of years or a high chronological age. It speaks to the quality and the satisfaction of that time. In the biblical sense, to be satisfied with long life is to reach the end of one's journey with a sense of completion, peace, and the realization of one's purpose. It is the promise that the believer will not be cut off prematurely or left with a life that feels half-finished or hollow. Instead, there is a divine guarantee of a full life, one that has been seasoned by the presence of God and has seen the fruit of its labor. This longevity is the outward manifestation of the inward, secret place, proving that the shadow of the Almighty is a life-sustaining environment. However, the promise reaches its crescendo in the final declaration, and show him my salvation. This is a spectacular shift from the physical to the eternal. The word salvation here, Yeshua, encompasses deliverance, health, prosperity, and ultimate rescue. To be shown, this salvation implies a spiritual revelation, a moment where the veil is pulled back, and the believer sees the grand tapestry of how God has been moving throughout their entire history. It is an invitation to witness the total victory of God over every trial that was faced during those long years. This vision of salvation serves as the final anchor for the soul, ensuring that the believer's story does not end in a grave but in a glorious realization of divine triumph. It suggests that at the end of a life lived in proximity to God, the final act is not one of fear or uncertainty, but one of seeing. We are promised that we will see the why behind the how, and we will recognize the hand of the Savior in every narrow escape and every shadow of protection. This concluding note transforms Psalm 91 from a prayer for survival into a blueprint for a legacy. It assures the faithful that their journey is leading toward a definitive, satisfying conclusion where the physical protection they enjoyed on earth transitions seamlessly into the eternal security of God's kingdom. Thus, the prayer ends not with a plea for help, but with a panoramic view of a life well lived and a soul fully rescued, anchored in the unwavering promise that God's final word over his children is always one of wholeness, victory, and everlasting sight. Conclusion, the unshakable promise. Beloved, we depart from this sacred reflection not as we came. We leave with the dust of the world brushed from our shoulders and the mantle of the Most High draped around our spirits. We have journeyed through the secret place, felt the warmth of the divine pinions, and heard the unshakable I will of our Creator. Remember that Psalm 91 is not just a poem of the past, it is your breathing reality for the hours ahead. When you walk through those doors and face the noise of the noonday, do not let your heart be troubled. You carry an invisible escort of angelic stewards. You possess the authority to tread upon every lion of fear and every cobra of doubt. Your life is not a series of accidents. It is a sheltered journey toward a satisfied conclusion. Stand tall in your personalized covenant, speak your faith into the atmosphere, and watch as the salvation of God unfolds in every detail of your day. You are covered, you are kept, and you are deeply, eternally loved. A final word: good luck on your journey ahead. May your voice carry the weight of this truth and touch the hearts of everyone who hears it. It has been an absolute honor to help you craft these reflections on such a powerful and timeless promise. Thank you for allowing me to collaborate with you on this spiritual deep dive. Go forth with confidence and peace.